So I'm going to start with the definition for a movement. The movement is the act or process of moving people or things from one place or position to another. It is a series of organized activity working toward an objective, also an organized effort to promote or attain an end. Welcome, everyone. My name is Cherie Deans. I'm the executive director of the Admiral Center. And about 3 years ago, I started doing work at the Admiral Center around engaging celebrities in meaningful work on behalf of low-income people. And the minute I would tell people what I was doing, what I did for a living, they would say, "I'm starting a movement, and if only I could get Jay-Z to come over on Saturday at 5 o'clock, this movement would blow up." I was like, "What are you talking about?" And it started making me think about movements. What are they? What do they require? How do they happen? We romanticize movements a lot, right? We imagine that Dr. Martin Luther King woke up one morning, spoke to Rosa, they boycotted the bus, and we got free. That's actually not what happened, right? Movements are very organized, structured events. And I started exploring them and studying them and thinking about them far more broadly than we tend to do in our community. The civil rights movement was not the only movement that ever happened. There are movements that happen today. Many of you are part of movements, and I'm excited to be talking to you about them because we have to get greater clarity around movement building if we're going to actually achieve it. And so I'm very excited to have with us today 4 people who are deeply connected to movements, and I've got questions for them. We're going to be talking about funding for movements, collaboration around movements, clarity of message around movements, and all of these folks are engaged in one way or another. So I'm going to ask each of them to introduce themselves and tell you the movement that they're a part of, and then we're going to get into a series of questions. At the end of that time, we're probably going to have questions for them for about 60 minutes, and then we're going to open it up to the group for your questions. I've got tons of questions, so I can keep asking if you don't have any. But I do want to give you that opportunity, so please know that. But if there is a question that's right on point to something that they're saying, feel free to raise your hand and ask that question. So I'm so happy to have you there. I'm going to turn it over to Phil first, and then go right down the line.
Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Philip Agnew. I am a member and a leader in the Dream Defenders from Florida. I'm a part of the same movement I think we all are part of, a movement for liberation of our people. Of oppressed folks. More specifically, our work centers around dismantling the school-to-prison pipeline in the state of Florida. We don't rank really highly in many categories, but we are number 1 in the school-to-prison pipeline. And they seem to be quite proud of that and work hard every year to make sure they maintain that position. We also are working around mass incarceration and working to get privatization of prisons and the industries that make money off of the bodies of black, brown, and poor folks in our state out of the state of Florida. And so that involves work around canceling contracts and hopefully potentially as we build deeper in our state, closing prisons and making it very uncomfortable for anybody that associates, sponsors, supports, or benefits from the privatization of incarceration, make it very hard for them to do business and sleep at night. Very excited to be here. I'm here to learn. I just came to take notes from the people on the panel, and thank you all for being here. Look forward to any questions.
My name is Rashad Robinson. I'm the executive director of colorofchange.org. Color of Change is the nation's largest online civil rights organization. We work to engage and empower black people and their political voice in this country. I know the name is Color of Change, but we are a black civil rights organization, and we work to mobilize black people and their allies with nearly 1 million members all around the country. We turn moments into movements. You know, every single day we're hit with all sorts of information, and oftentimes people are trying to make sense of it and find something to do. And we worked through technology to turn things that are happening in the world and give people actionable steps. So Glenn Beck goes on the air and calls President Obama a racist with a deep-seated hatred for white people, and Color of Change starts a 2-year campaign that gets 200 advertisers to leave the Glenn Beck show, leaving the show at the end when Fox canceled it. The only advertisers were that company that you put gold in an envelope and send it and they send you back cash. It wasn't Honda or Toyota or many of the other companies. And the aftermath of voter ID and Stand Your Ground, Color of Change led a corporate campaign to get 70 corporations to leave the American Legislative Exchange Council, which was behind Stand Your Ground and voter ID, privatized prisons, the Arizona immigration law, and many other things that put our communities in harm's way. So it's taking these moments that exist in the world, giving people something to do that's actionable, moving them up a ladder of engagement to deeper and deeper action, and building real political power that holds corporations and politicians accountable to the needs of our community.
Good afternoon. My name is Michael McBride. I am a pastor of a church here in the Bay Area called the Way Christian Center, and I am the national director for the Lifelines to Healing campaign, which is a campaign of the PICO National Network, a national network of faith congregations, a few schools that are working to unleash the power of people, to use their faith and their values to make faith certainly a powerful engine for social change in this country. Our campaign has launched what we call the Live Free movement in an effort to organize local communities across the country using our faith institutions to reduce gun violence in the era of mass incarceration and to generate the public and political will to end the dehumanization of people of color, particularly black and brown folk and poor folk who are often left on the margins. We are very committed to organizing. We're not committed to having church, even though we will continue to have church and go to the synagogue and worship at the temple and the mosque. But we believe that once we get done with our acts of worship, we can continue worshiping by putting our faith into action in very public space and bringing our people who are most impacted by these issues into a confrontation, a public confrontation with the decision makers who have the ability to change the worst conditions in our communities. Our movement is very much about unleashing the genius of people like Brother Clarence Ford, who was on our panel this morning, who came through a lot of our organizing work. Obviously, the brother's been a genius since he was born. And he just need a few folks to remind him of that, give him a platform to realize his genius and in real time change policies that are harming our community. So we're very excited to be on this panel with such great movement leaders and look forward to the conversation that we'll have together.
Hello, everybody. My name is Abraham Medina. I'm part of the undocumented youth movement, and now I'm transitioning into not being a youth anymore. But you know,
I have a third.
and it's been a tough transition.
Hold on,
Yeah. But part of it is, it has been years, over 10 now, going almost 15 years of undocumented youth coming together first to lose the fear, and then to work together to see in what ways to develop in what has become a nationwide movement, with different dynamic components to it. I'm also part of, locally in Orange County. I'm from Santa Ana, Orange County. I was born in Mexico DF. I came here when I was 8 years old. And what we're doing in Orange County is also trying to create starting the beginning of a restorative resistance movement, and where we can engage in political change in one of the most conservative counties in the nation. And so that's the two movements right now that I'm a part of.
Okay, thank you so much. Applause, everyone. So I have questions. Can you all hear me? I have questions that I'm going to ask each of them to start answering, and I know, because I know them, that they'll all jump in whenever they're ready. But I'm going to start with Rashad, and you might have seen the pictures that we're scrolling through, because when we talk about movements, many of us, our mind goes back to marches. And so I want to start with, what's the new face of movement building? What does a modern day movement look like? How does it develop? How does it form? and how does it multiply? And I'm gonna throw that to Rashad first.
I think that's a great question, and it's something that we think a lot about at Color of Change. You know, our organization in many ways started from a single email in the aftermath of Hurricane Katrina. There were a number of activists, in particular our co-founders, Van Jones and James Rucker, who were outraged by the lack of response from the government. And while people were doing great things to donate money and to provide service, like where was the government accountability in terms of being responsible for the most vulnerable? And Color of Change started, you know, from a single email, utilizing the best of technology, utilizing sort of the tools of the time, utilizing good storytelling and narrative, and having a clear target and a clear ask of folks to get engaged. And all of those elements have always been part of movement building. I think that sometimes when we talk about the use of technology, it's something new. But in the 60s, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee installed a Watts line in their Shaw University office, which was the precursor to the 1-800 line. And it allowed for organizers to bypass Ma Bell operators, which were oftentimes controlled by the White Citizens Council, and move information much quicker to the folks that needed the information. Watts Line did not change their theory of change, did not change their ask, it did not change sort of the way that they were doing organizing. It was a tool that they used, much the way we may bypass certain barriers by using Twitter. It was a tool that folks used to sort of pull a particular lever and drive an agenda. And so when we think about sort of the kind of current and modern needs of movement building, how do we sort of leverage the best tools of our time? It does go back to the sort of classic questions that we have to constantly ask ourselves is sort of, what is our ask? What is our value proposition? Who are our people? And what are we doing for them? And in terms of sort of messaging, it's in an ongoing way illustrating concrete harm, being very clear with folks around sort of what's at stake, building common ground and making connections that are much broader than sort of the individual community impacted. And, you know, at the end of the day, like telling the hero and villain story for folks. And so from my perspective at Color of Change, we do all of that, and we try to multiply, to sort of use that phrase, and blow that up by identifying and leveraging the best tools and technology of our time.
Thank you. So Pastor McBride, Rashad talked about refining the ask. And I want you to speak a little bit about how you went from what you were talking about yesterday and communicating the moral imperative to getting down to the clear and specific ask that you were making of people in community, of politicians, of community members.
So I think, you know, part of the gift of being able to organize real people is that real people are clear about what they want. People close to pain are clear about what they want. And in many of our communities and congregations across the country, there is no confusion about what people want. People want safe neighborhoods. People want access to opportunities. People want to be treated fairly. And in many of our communities across the country, where we have been doing our organizing work, we've been continuing to see the carnage, the literal carnage, the bodies that are just littered all across the streets on a weekly, daily basis. And part of what we began to appreciate is that, you know, the specificity of what our family members, our loved ones, those who are tired of burying children, those who are tired of going to funerals, they want the violence to stop. It is very clear. Now, you know, I think all of us want the violence to stop, and all of us are willing to do certain things to make the violence stop. What we found is when we find good strategies that are able to make the violence stop, how do we actually move our decision makers to fully invest in those strategies versus other things that may be a little bit more politically correct or politically safe to do. And part of what the specificity of moving our folks into concrete asks around violence was that it allowed us then to begin to do very serious research around the best strategies that actually reduce violence. And for the last several years, we've been able to take some of these strategies, popularly known as ceasefire, bring them into communities that are most impacted by gun violence, and do it in such a way where it actually creates dignity, respect, but also public safety, with this kind of intentionality around investing resources that are targeting those who are most impacted, driving violence or at risk of being victimized by gun violence. Part of, I think, our learning has been that when we actually bring people and keep people close to the decision-making, close to the construction of solutions, those folks become active and willing participants in their own liberation. The further away that we put folks from that kind of construction and implementation, then the less inclined they are to do the hard work that is necessary to see the ball across the goal line. So part of what we have figured out, and I think, again, it is no mystery, but, you know, sometimes we can get so smart that we kind of become dumb. I was trying to think of a different word than dumb. But that's what we become. Somebody say amen, right? So part of what we have to do is figure out how do we actually just do what makes sense. In our communities, I tell our folks all the time, I could not hire enough people to liberate our communities. But if you put people in a position to be close to the execution of their own liberative strategies, they will do it for free. Now, I'm not letting the funders off the hook. I think hopefully I'll get another chance to talk to the funders. But the whole point is, you know, keeping people close to the pain, giving them the opportunity to have a voice. It creates an engine and a fire in them that no paycheck could amount to. And I think that's one of the things that we've been able to do as we get closer to the specificity of our asks.
Thank you. And so, Abraham, I'm going to move to you. And a lot of our current work around movement building has all been focused on how we get rights that are secured through voting. And I want you to talk a little bit about how you are able to scare people with a population of folks that don't have the right to vote. And so, and I'm going to ask you to follow up on that, Pastor McBride, because you support and advocate with people that are formerly incarcerated, and they have the same problem. So if you could speak to that, I'd be great.
Yeah, it's been interesting because at the beginning, we came together, not really with, we didn't have any demands at the beginning. We came together because we wanted to work on losing the fear and kind of dealing with the trauma of the experiences some of us have faced coming here. But one of the things that came out of that was initially a nationwide movement to go against this fear, and it was our first, you know, it was then when we started to say undocumented and unafraid, undocumented and unashamed. And it was then little by little becoming a national movement against this fear, and little by little becoming more organized into proposing demands and learning from what came before us and utilizing those strategies. And so, you know, in our communities, some people in our communities, their parents have been deported. At one point, we weren't able to go to higher education. The AB 540 was there in the early 2000s. The California Dream Act wasn't there yet. I had to leave school for 2 years, and so what else could we lose? We realized that we may not have the power to vote, but when we came together, we created people power, and we had people power, and without that fear, we strategized nationwide to engage in civil direct action, and so we had to do, unfortunately, is put ourselves on the line, go into elected official offices, have sit-ins, shut down the offices of elected officials, and strategically, so that hopefully we could disrupt the normal functioning of their system. And so by doing that, being organized nationwide, we were able to strategically get the attention of elected officials that we were a part of the community, that they had to listen. If not, we were gonna do something for them to listen to us, even if we had to disrupt.
So, before I'm going to give Phil a chance to get in, then we'll come back, Pastor McBride, if you want to say something. So, I mean, you, Phil, have been ultimately disruptive. I think your work started with taking over government buildings. But what I'd love for you to talk about, because I know Pastor McBride and I were in a room with a civil rights leader who reminded us that movements are for the young, right? And any of us that can reflect on the anniversary of the March on Washington may have noticed that all the people that marched with Martin were still in front of the podium. And so that's a curious thing. And I'd love for you to talk about whether or not the elders of movement building are creating the space for young people to take the role that they should be taking in the work. Sorry.
Okay. We did not talk about this in the pre-meeting. I wanna say, and usually when I'm in the audience and I see people on the panel saying this, I'm like, come on, but I'm gonna do it. I'm really honored to be on the panel with y'all. I really genuinely am honored to be on the panel with all of you all. I do want to say, though, our movement didn't begin with the takeover of building. And I want to talk about that specifically because it leads to what you're saying. It was a year and sometimes a little bit more than a year of organizing and talking to people and really building the relationships needed to maintain 31 days in a building that didn't want you there for hours. So, but to answer your question, I don't know if it is the role of older folks to create the space. I think that's the catalyzing nature of young people. We create our own space. And what we learned last week was we learned about the mainstream and margins. And most of the innovation and creativity that we see, not just in movements, but in the world, in technology and in social realms and politics, come from the margins. And so it's very rare that someone is going to let loose of something unless they have great foresight, unless they're really determined to really build something. It's very rare that the margins are going to be, a space is going to be built for them. And so it's the role of young people to create that space for themselves. And I think we've done that. I know we've done that. I've been a part of opportunities. I've been a part of rooms. I've been a part of convenings. I've been a follower in spaces. I've been a leader in spaces where young people are saying, you know, this is our time. We inherited what we got. We have an opportunity to build what we want, and no one else is going to do it but us. To directly answer your question, older folks, I've also been in rooms where older people have provided the bridge for that. And I think possibly it's because of the 50th anniversary of a lot of our civil rights victories, where if you take stock at those victories and you realize that we're in the same position, it's out of sheer necessity and hindsight being 2020 that older folks are now saying, you know what, let's talk to these young people. Because if we had had that benefit, we might have been able to not just win back what we had lost 50 years ago, but actually win something that progresses the movement as a whole. So I have been a part of, I'm not going to bash older folks because I think there will be an opportunity, hopefully, where I'll join those ranks. And so I do think they attempt. I do think there are times when folks can move out of the way. And I think young people are proficient enough to gingerly do that. But older, it's really hard when you done built something and you created something and you fought for something and you stood up every day, and then to relinquish it to some loud people who got phones in their hand and just ready to go. But I've been a part of spaces and I've seen that happen. I think it'll continue.
Great. So you talked about the year that it took for you to prepare. And so I want each of you, because I think sometimes we're romanticized into the idea, and I fell into the same trap, that movements suddenly pop up. And so I want you to talk about the preparation and the cost of your movement building. And when I mean cost, I mean it in the broadest sense of the word, from the money to the toll that it takes on everything. So I want all of you to speak on it because you have different perspectives, but whoever would like to start first.
I'll go.
Go ahead.
Get it out the way. So as I said, there is a heavy cost, and Abraham, I think he touched on it really appropriately. The cost in a really kind of esoteric sense is life and death. It's a life worth living and a life that death can overcome. And so the cost is very, very, very high. The number one thing I've made a little list here is there's a financial cost. Money gets spent, and if you had to balance a budget, or you own a home, or you have anything of note, you know that money goes, and so everything costs money. Whether you're paying somebody or buying a brochure, it costs money. So there's a very high financial cost. There's an emotional and physical toll that is on everybody that is in this room and everybody that seeks to participate in what we call the movement. You know, we're every time we do something, it's like catharsis, because you're trying to break years and years of habits and programming on people, that people don't just spontaneously come to anywhere. People don't just spontaneously revolt. People don't just spontaneously declare their existence and speak truth to power. Not in our society. And so you're working with populations of people, and it's not going to just happen. It don't take 2 hours. It's not a Saturday morning cartoon. It's not a episode of Law and Order. You're dealing with people who need, who, because of the systems that we operate under and because we are survivors, have found a way to survive within a system that doesn't want them. And so there's a great emotional and physical toll on people. I think understanding the true nature of time is a cost. All of us, I'm sure, we read books on SNCC and the Black Panthers, and it's always funny. You'll read a chapter and it'll say, you know, they did this, and then it'll say, and a year later they did this. And it's one sentence, but when you're like knee deep in minute by minute, second by second, hearing no, things not going the way you planned, and the things that you know, and sometimes a better thing happening, and you having to recalibrate for that. The true nature of time is definitely a cost that people aren't aware of. You know, I have friends that be like, y'all should do something about this, or, you know, y'all should go there, you know, or, and I admire that, because they call on you, but it takes a long time. And also I think building healing spaces just takes a whole lot of time, which is a lot of what the work that we have to do is, and so I'll just leave it at that. There's just a heavy cost that you can't put money on.
So can you, because I want people to understand, how much did it cost for you to be in that building, the 30 days? The T-shirts, the megaphones, the food, the bed, because people don't think, they just thought you came with your sleeping bag.
Right.
I think a lot of times.
We didn't even have a sleeping bag.
So you know, so I'd love for you to give that number,
Right.
and then I would love for you to tell me the number that you wish you would have had and what you would have done with it.
Okay, I'll start with that first. $1 gazillion. So it cost about $50,000 to $60,000 for us to be in the Capitol for 1 month. If you take the state of Florida's numbers, it costs $200,000 for us to be in that building for the month, for the lights to be on, for the police officers to be in that building for us. And so it was a very high cost. We had 3 meals a day. We were blessed by folks to send us money. The folks on this panel were supportive of us, and people in this room sent in donations. The quick story, the first day, lunch came, and one of our people came up to me and said, hey, what are we going to do for lunch? And I said, listen, people going to go and they're going to come back. They're going to go and they're going to come back, and we'll be good. It's like, okay. then what we gonna do for dinner? It's like, and you just tell people to really just go big at McDonald's, and we'll just do it. And right then, pizza started coming in, and people were supportive, and so we were fed 3 meals a day, every day, with extra. We had to pay for materials. We had to pay for people's time to be in there. And then also there was the cabin fever. We were going crazy in that building. It's other Dream Defenders here. Ahmad and Sierra are here. We went crazy in the building. I don't mind telling y'all that. It was just crazy. You're just in this building. They never turn off the lights. The security guards didn't want you in there. You couldn't strategize because they standing up over you, and and so it was a heavy cost on that as well.
A couple of things, in terms of sort of cost, when we launched our campaign against ALEC, it sort of happened because, we were looking at these voter ID laws popping up all around the country, and we were trying to figure out what's the theory of change to push back. Color of Change at the time was about 800,000 members, black folks and their allies. The places where these laws were popping up, there was no clear theory of change. And what I mean by that is that we could have mobilized all of our members to push back against the Tea Party state legislatures and the governors, and there would have been sort of nothing. It was also polling at 75, 80% across the board, and like 65% in black communities. And so we were trying to figure out sort of what's the theory of change behind making any sort of dent. And we started to sort of research how these laws were coming into pass, who was writing them, and all signs started pointing towards ALEC. All of this is happening about 6 or 7 months before we ever launched the campaign. We became experts. We went and met with the Center for American Progress. We met with the Advancement Project. We went and met with the people who run ALEC Exposed. We started learning everything we could. We learned about the full range, and we started making really strategic decisions about our communications plan, what we would concentrate on and what we wouldn't, sort of how we would engage our members, how we would talk about it, and be very clear and very specific. And then we realized, ALEC is not really a target. They can do whatever they want. If someone starts protesting Color of Change from the right, I'm probably going to take pictures of it and send an email out to my members to raise money. So we started to research more, and the sort of strategic insight, and for us, we're always looking for a sort of strategic insight. What is the lever that if we pull it effectively, whether it's on private prisons, whether it's on, getting a TV show canceled from the show, whether it's passing a piece of legislation, what's the lever that if we pull it, other stuff will unravel and things will happen, we can get people involved? The strategic insight was that 98% of ALEC's money came from corporations. Corporations who every single day said, buy our products, use our services, black folks, but then were had money in this shady organization that no one knew about that was going into state legislatures and passing voter ID, was passing Stand Your Ground, was passing, Arizona immigration laws, all of this stuff that they were behind. And Coca-Cola, who had money in ALEC at the time, would say, oh no, we're only giving money because they help us with the discriminatory soda tax. That was Coke's language. And so all these corporations are putting money, and this goes back to just a bigger point that needs to be made. 50 years ago, when the march was focused on government and what government should do, that was a strategic choice as well. The strategic choices of the day in terms of what corporations are doing to our community, from predatory lending to privatized prisons, requires a different type of target and different type of strategy. But for us, we spent months. Then we started writing letters. We picked 15 corporations that spend a lot of money in black communities, that have huge marketing budgets, that have Black History Month celebrations, that do all of the stuff to invest in our community, but at the same time had money there. We picked those corporations and we started communicating them. We started with a letter. We started with back and forth conversations. We would get on the phone at some point. They'd put their senior level black person on the phone. They would tell a story to me about voting with their grandfather. I would tell a story about voting with my grandfather. They would say, we give money to both sides. I was like, there's really not two sides to black people voting. And so we would go back and forth for months. in the process, you know, we were mobilizing our members around the tragedy in Sanford and mobilizing our members who wanted to get engaged and wanted to support efforts to hold George Zimmerman accountable and bring justice for Trayvon and his family. And then it was exposed that Alec was behind Stand Your Ground as well. And so we're doing this on voting rights. At this point, we have a couple of corporations that have pulled out behind the scenes. All of this is happening because we had some funders that gave us general ops money and provided the type of resources for smart black young people to do smart black young people things. And trusted us to like make some choices and make some decisions inside of our organization that allowed us to pivot when we needed to. And so now we are like mobilizing. Hundreds of thousands of our members are fighting for justice for Trayvon. We've got about 110 of our members that are standing up against corporate-funded voter suppression, specifically ALEC. If you combine those two numbers, it was probably, because there was a lot of overlap, it was probably about 170 sort of thousand people sort of between all of these petitions. 270,000 people between those two petitions. And so we then pivoted and we gave Coca-Cola 48 hours. And we said, here's the website. Here's what we're going to say about the conversations that we've had over the last several months, where we've went back and forth, and you've got 48 hours to leave ALEC because we've given you a decision. And we had other corporations lined up too. We started giving people time. We sent them, we created a back-ended website, all of those things. They viewed it, they ignored us. 48 hours later, we go out against ALEC. 5 hours later, Coca-Cola decides they're going to pull and calls us and say, please stop having your members call us. Over the course of the next several weeks, we were able to push corporation after corporation to remove. I'd be on MSNBC. They'd say, Kraft is saying they're staying with ALEC. I would say, well, they're next. Then they would leave. About a week and a half, 3 weeks in, that was when we started to sort of have funders reach out to us who had been funding many other much larger sort of Washington, D.C. based groups to do ALEC, to do research. Research, mind you, research that we would have never had a campaign if it was not funded. Right. You know, research was clearly part of the Venn diagram to our success. But, these D.C. based sort of think tanks have no moral authority, right? So corporations can say to them, we give to both sides. We give to the left and the right. They can tell a DC-based sort of left-wing organization that. And they can't, but a civil rights organization can say, there's really not two sides to black people voting. And so through that process, we started to get ALEC-specific funding that started to happen that allowed us to but then at that point, the funding didn't just come to sort of support a domino strategy that was happening. It also came to say, no, can you actually go concentrate on this? Or you can go concentrate on that. And we were actually very clear that until ALEC stops with Stand Your Ground or in voter ID, we won't touch any other issue. And so the next 20 corporations dropped, and then ALEC dropped their committee to do that. And then we decided that we would refocus and expand. But all of these were sort of internal decisions and choices that we made. Some of the choices cost us money and didn't allow us to maybe grow as quicker. But all of the choices, I believe, led to a campaign that ALEC is down 70 corporations. They have a $1.4 million budget. They have dropped a number of committees that worked on a bunch of issues. They had to close down their DC office and move to a much smaller one in Virginia. And we have a narrative about the right wing. And when legislation pops up that we've never seen before, we don't know where it came from in our states, we have something to point to. We can say that this is the same group that's behind Stand Your Ground. This is the same group that's behind voter ID. And that messaging was done because we took some chances and some choices, and some funders took some chances and made some choices on us.
So the cost is literally you and me. Jesus says that if anyone seeks to gain their life, they will lose it. But if anyone seeks to lose their life for his sake, they will find it. And I think that we teach in our organizing that the first revolution is always an internal one.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody want to be a part of revolution, but don't nobody want to change. So we have to first be willing to lose our assumptions, lose our conventional thinking. It's insanity to believe that we could pour new wine into old wineskins. And that's a lot of what a lot of us, try to do with this work. We trying to relive the civil rights days, and everybody said they marched with Dr. King back in them days. And the only benefit they have is Dr. King is not alive to be able to tell who's lying, right? Because I was told by folk like Harry Belafonte and Dr. Ivor Carruthers that at the height of the civil rights movement, there were 30 churches supporting Dr. King. Brother Belafonte was raising money to make sure the movement was funded. I remember when Nelson Mandela died several months ago. Everybody was talking about how they were part of the divestment campaign. Ain't it something that after folk die, everybody is all of a sudden was a revolutionary? When we have an opportunity to be a revolutionary right now, literally wherever you are. People tell me, well, if I was the president, I'd do this. I say, guess what? You're not the president. You're a pastor. You're a teacher. You're a funder. You're an organizer. So do that job. All right? Do it in a revolutionary manner. And I think that the cost is high, and we have to be willing to pay the cost. Now, certainly for us, one of my mentors told me that it takes a certain level of madness to think you're going to change the world. Right? Lord have mercy, right? Like this, and a lot of people opt out of that work, right? Because it's like, this world is not going to change. In our communities, the inevitability of gun violence that many folk in our communities have, that this is inevitable and it's never going to change. The cost associated with changing our own community's mind, much less the police department, much less the elected officials, our own people, that we are not inherently violent folk, right? That is a cost that really wears on the spirit. And I'm not just saying all this because I'm a preacher, but I believe that one of the casualties of progressive movements is faith. And I think if we do not quickly recover some kind of spiritual underpinning for the work that we are doing, then we will become that which we abhor. We will not have the gas to carry us across the finish line. So I believe that it requires us then to really look in the mirror and be honest about the cost that is associated with us. And let me just say this one last thing. Working in a historically white male-led organization like the PICO Network, we had to convince our white male leaders that this work is going to cost PICO. Not Michael McBride. Somebody say amen, right? Amen. Because I ain't got no money. Somebody say amen, right? But it's going to cost PICO. It means that we have to be able to put our power on the line. Because powerful organizations get powerful by working on whatever they work on. But when you start to work on behalf of the vulnerable, you risk losing your power. So are organizations willing to risk losing their power on behalf of the least of these? We talked about how we had to have a bold conversation about race. Realizing that not everybody in the PICO Network wanted to have a bold conversation about race. That a lot of well-meaning white folks left the organization because they didn't want to have, they felt like we shouldn't have to talk about race even though we organize the people of color. We should just talk about shared pain and shared. I said, yeah, let's talk about that, but let's talk about why you so nervous to take instructions from a person of color. That an idea may not look the way you think it should look. So because it don't look or sound the way you think it should sound, then it must not be a valid idea. right? That costs an organization something, right? I think that the cost, aside from the money, aside from the people, it's an internal cost, a cost of how we see the world, and I think that we have to be willing to pay that cost. But I do believe that, it reaps a reward, a benefit that allows us to do this work even more powerfully.
So we've established that movements aren't free, right? So we now know that. Abraham, I'm happy to let you talk about that, but I would love to shift, because you asked me explicitly for us to ensure that we talk about the role of art, music, and culture in movement building. And so I don't want to shortchange your cost conversation, but I also would love to hear how we ensure that we preserve that authenticity and allow people to bring everything that they are into this revolutionary work. So you have a choice.
I think it's tied to it, and I'm really impacted by the words everybody's sharing, because it is a human cost. I mean, 2 weeks ago we had a direct action in Santana where we shut down. It was an avenue right in front of the city ICE detention center, and it was led by the undocumented trans liberation movement. And this last Thursday, one of our sisters in the struggle, who is transgender, she was found dead in a parking lot in a neighboring city, victim of a hate crime. We have had youth, undocumented youth across the nation, like Joaquin Luna from Texas in 2011, commit suicide. And so I definitely think it is a human cost. And I think that it has been through not only engaging the systems with numbers, because it seems that they sometimes are like, oh, we need data and information. And then when we gave them the data and information, they want the human story. Then they have the human story, we want the data information. When they have both, they don't want to pay attention to us. And I just feel like it has part of that power that we have in our communities, and we've been reconnecting, is that, back in the days, our forms of expression were criminalized. And we've been reclaiming our word and been using it as a form of resistance. And so part of that poetry, part of the work that I do is I share my story through poetry. I share Joaquin Luna's story through poetry, and it has impacted a lot of people around me, has built closer ties with each other. Sometimes, in order for you to reach somebody's heart and override their mind, their logical thinking that prevents them from seeing and feeling with their heart, is through music, culture. Yeah. And I feel like sometimes we can't move together because everybody's talking. But the other day I felt like I realized something. So sometimes maybe we come together through our culture and artistic expression, because when somebody's playing the drum, and no longer we don't have to talk, we just move with the rhythm of our heart and the rhythm of music and culture and artistic expression as a form of resistance. And I feel like we use it in the movement too, because we all these things that we face every day, the other cost, so that for losing your family, losing yourself, suicide, mental health, all kinds of things. It's like when we're with all these things, our heart and our minds are like this. Sometimes we need the spaces. We need these spaces to reconnect with our cultural values, our artistic expressions, and remember that our heartbeat is like this. And with that, we are able to focus and generate change through people power. And I feel like that adds power to our movement in a degree of strength that is immeasurable.
Yeah. So I grew up with music. Well, first, Mr. Belafonte. Mr. Belafonte said, amongst a whole lot of things, that he drops gems. Y'all gotta. He's one of those people I was talking about. And so he said, when a conquering nation wants to pillage and conquer another nation, they seek to do that primarily in two ways. First, they destroy their women, and then they erase their culture. And so culture has to be a centerpiece of what we do. The slaves didn't do Midwest Academy strategy charts. The message was passed along through music. That drum beat that Abraham is talking about does far more than a one-to-one, a one-on-one, whatever we want to call them, conversation, a relational conversation. And that's why, I believe that's simply why, and I'm not going to veer too far off of it, but that's why the emphasis has been placed in our schools away from modes of creative expression, because the painter sees the impossible. They don't see a canvas, they see something more. The musician, when they're improvising, they're able to see the future and predict something that has not happened yet. We watch a dancer defy gravity when they perform. And it's so it is the artists. The artists are the gateway to truth, the gatekeepers to truth. And so it has to be a centerpiece of what we do. And so I just wanted to really highlight that, because we always forget it and act like, oh, those the art kids over there. So we'll ask them to come and entertain us while we're doing the lunch thing and then the dinner thing, and then we'll get it. But in that drum beat, in that music, in that expression, look, when I started with music with 4 years old, I probably wouldn't even got through school without music, right? Without something for me to go to find solace in, or find a way to, have my voice. And so, one, culture must be at the center, and two, beware the STEM. Beware of it. I'm going to just say that. I believe in science, technology, engineering, and math, but beware anybody that hinges their policy on taking out any mode of creativity and expression and ability for young people to see things that aren't there, and the ability to create. Beware of that. Beware of it, because that is the primary mode of a system that seeks to oppress young people and take out all creative thought.
And it's not just and it's not just the erasing of our culture. It's the co-optation of our culture. It's like what we're being fed every single day through popular culture and the media. It's what people go home every single night, and the story that's being told about men and boys of color in this country. No matter what we do, sort of from a sort of putting a documentary on PBS or getting something on MSNBC, every single night millions of people are going home and seeing hero law enforcement and criminal black and brown man on shows like Law and Order. They're seeing a story being told about black people and brown people not being able to be trusted or not being able to make decisions through through what's called reality programming on our shows. And that is sort of part of a larger system that informs every single conversation that's had in state Capitol Hills and in the Capitol Hill in Washington, D.C. about how policy moves and how decisions are moved. If sort of every single day people are tuning in to a story and a narrative about who we are as a people and about whether or not folks deserve the benefit of the doubt. And when you don't get the benefit of the doubt, when you live in a society and a culture that instantly does not give you the benefit of the doubt, and all the cultural and political and media narratives continue to back that up, the opportunities, the sort of road and the path that any of us are going to be on, and the folks that come after us will be on, is going to, not be fair, and we're not going to have sort of a real opportunity for progress. So in terms of sort of what our movement needs here and what we should be thinking about as we continue, I think the cultural piece is important, and I think it's about rewriting and holding accountable the story that's being told, and we've got to shift that story as much as we have to hold up particular policy goals, that regardless of whether they're the best policy in the world, they're going to fit inside of a story of whether or not people deserve the benefit of the doubt, deserve support, and deserve empathy in our culture.
So I'm going to ask everyone to comment on what Rashad said on the panel, and then I'm going to turn it to the audience for questions. But you basically said, you know, this is what I think the movement requires right now. And so I want, congratulations for staying on topic. And I want each of you, and it's hard to narrow it down to one thing. I mean, we were talking about, you know, we need to invest in base building. We need to think about technology. But, you know, if you could envision, if we could bring this one thing to force, we could get so much closer to winning. And so I'm going to ask, Rashad, you already did yours. I'm going to ask Phil, Pastor McBride, and Abraham to do theirs, and then we're going to turn to the audience. So whoever wants to go first.
I think movements require people.
Yeah.
And people ask me all the time about that, and I say, you don't need everybody. You need the right bodies. When you get the right bodies, you'll get more bodies. And then you'll have enough bodies to win, right? And I think that we have to be very, very clear about not losing people in our movement building. Because it's easy to chase money, power, fame. There's a lot of poverty pimping going on in the movement for black men and boys, brown men and boys, Asian men and boys, LGBTQ. I mean, there's a whole lot of poverty pimping going on in the church, a whole lot of poverty pimping going on in the schools. We can't forget that movements require people. And didn't Dr. Maya Angelou say people remember less what you say and more how you make them feel? That people have feelings. I love how Father G said it yesterday, tenderness, right? In this movement, we have to remember that people are at the center of the movement. And if we can't keep people at the center of our movement, the right people, not everybody, but the right people most impacted by these things we're talking about, because they're pre-anointed leaders, more fundable organizations, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, we have to be discriminatory. I get it. You know, I have to make those hard decisions as well. But keeping people at the center of our movements, I think, is critically important.
I believe that we also got to provide the space to connect with our culture, because sometimes our culture provides that wisdom, and I feel like I was disconnected until I started looking for it, and I started to understand things a little differently. And I feel like, we were talking about in our circles the other day, because, Soraya Reyes, may she rest in power. It's just like we're talking about the violence in our communities. Also, there's been discussions in our circles about entitlement and male violence. And so, I remember we had a conversation what are the teachings are that we have been disconnected from. And I remember my story, Jerry Theo, is like, when you go into a circle ceremony, you ask for permission, and like everything, when you're little, you ask for permission. Like when you say con permiso, when you walk into a house, when you get food, you ask for permission. When you pick sage, you ask for permission. And I feel like if we're from we're little, we're taught that hey, con permiso, or and ask and be respectful and not feel entitled to just take things. I feel like it'll provide that basis for a great amount of change. And sometimes we're just disconnected and taught by society that we just take, that we just greed. There's greed. And the other thing that impacted me too was that my aunt gave me this bear paw in 2010, and she told me the story, and I didn't really get it till probably like a couple years, like last year in the circle, where she told me, that there was the Shoshone story of a bear clan, and then she told me that this bear, there was this in this bear clan that this bear was the worst bear in the bear clan, and did a bunch of bad things, and so the bear was kicked out of his bear clan. And that's the worst thing that can happen to you in your community, to be exiled, like a lot of us are sometimes, and that when we don't belong, and they want us out of here. And so that's the worst thing that can happen. And so what she was telling me was that this bear went to the woods and then climbed up to he just thought about what he could do to kind of have redemption. So he climbed up to a mountain and climbed up to the skies and became the bear constellation, providing a guide to the heavenly hunting grounds for those that are transitioning into the spirit world. And so one of the things that I didn't get from that story, and that I feel like that with the meaning behind it to me, was that even the worst person in our society can become a leader, can become a spiritual leader, and can lead in the way and leave a blueprint for others to follow, those that come after him or her. And so I feel like that was very powerful, because then there is space in our movement for everybody, for even those that are exiled and alienated. And so that's why, like, the culture provides wisdom, and it provides inspiration and motivation.
Thank you.
You said it, provide space. I think we need to work every day to build a bigger room. My dad used to love them old Western movies. And, they would meet at sundown, and it'd be a tumbleweed, and they'd come, and one of them would always say, this town ain't big enough for the both of us. And I think that's kind of how we treat this. This thing ain't big enough for both of us, And so I think we need to work every day to expand the room. We always get in arguments about whether the old people did it right or the new people doing it better, or if academics just want to sit in the room, or the activist junkies want to. We need a complete movement, because the United States has a Marines, a Navy, an Army, and an Air Force for a reason. And they don't argue with each other about, and the Coast Guard. Well, we not the Coast Guard. But we not gonna, we don't see, well, it probably does happen, I'm sure it does, but we don't see the Army saying, why you flying? What the real work is down here on the ground, and we don't see the Marines saying to the SEALs, why you over there? And so we need to make a bigger room for a more complete movement that, this, you can go, there's not one way to insert yourself into this thing, and what we do is we make organizing and we make movement work into this fraternity and sorority that only a few people can get in, and you're not marginalized enough, or you had too much privilege. If we're fighting for the liberation of our people, we need a room that's big enough. And then the last thing I'll say, we need a little space in the room for moonshot ideas.
Yeah.
So instead of just what we say no to, what do we want to say yes to? What that's beyond, and I stole this idea. Moonshot ideas came from Google, and then I stole this from somebody else. I was on a panel, and instead of talking about, and this is for example, instead of talking about marriage equality, why don't we talk about the elimination of marriage completely? Right? Instead of talking about immigration, why don't we see a world without borders? And I think we do need people who, maybe those are the cloud people. I know like a few in our organization, who just, they're always like 8 years ahead when the world is all water, and but we need people thinking about that, and we don't need to just vilify them because they don't care about what's going on now. So yeah, bigger room.
I can't swim, Phil, so I'm scared of that world.
We in the Army.
Thanks for perpetuating that stereotype. All right. So I want to turn to the audience now, and great. Kwesi?
Hello, y'all. So, but turn it up a little bit.
Can you? Would you mind standing up? What do you need? Does he need to have a mic for the live stream? I just want to check. Are you good?
That would be awesome. Yes.
Okay, I'm going to come to you.
Okay.
Or can you meet me halfway?
I'm meeting halfway.
Is it live? 'Cause there's no volume that comes out of it.
Oh, so you couldn't hear me this whole
No,
time?
you were just talking, but you look good with your hand. And I didn't want to rush you.
Okay.
All right, we're going to use this one. We couldn't hear you at all. Hold on.
Okay. All right. So, Pastor McBride, you know you sparked this one, right? So, when Pastor was talking about his internal conflict in the PICO organization, it brought me to me thinking about, well, that's a conflict that's happening across the progressive movement. It's basically, all right, we say we're progressives, but we're not living up to progressive values. So, back to the panel now. Now that we know that there's fights that go on internally within the progressive movement, what's your role in holding the movement accountable so that way black men and boys don't get marginalized like this?
So I almost wrote an op-ed called "Why Being Progressive May Not Be Good for Black People," because I did a lot of my work in Berkeley. I planned a church in Berkeley, the bastion of all that is liberal and progressive, and they were progressive about everything except for being black and being a Christian. And I told them, as a black pastor, I got a problem with that. I think that when I went to D.C. after the Sandy Hook tragedies, we realized very quickly that the progressive policymakers in D.C. had no interest in elevating the ways in which gun violence deeply impact black and brown communities. I was actually told by progressive lawmakers that we would lose the country if we tried to talk about the violence in Chicago and Oakland and Detroit and Miami. I think that I don't know what's made this conversation so popular and sexy. Because again, I've been trying to raise money for a few years as executive director, and I've had some funders tell me things like, well, we're not actually funding that kind of work anymore. And certainly in the last year or so, it's all seemed to come back. And certainly all of us, I think, are moved by our contemporary moment. I think the issues around, say, Trayvon moved a lot of people. I think the issues around Sandy Hook have moved a lot of people. I think the president's leadership around this initiative has moved a lot of people. My question and my concern, though, is what happens when the gas runs out on this. Will our communities be right back in the same place of not being valued enough to have this cost, this high cost, this internal struggle worth going through? I think that the role of progressive or the role of people of color within a progressive movement is to not let progressive movements and organizations off the hook for keeping race at the center. Just because we don't want to see race don't mean that race still is not real. We have to have the courage, we have to have the sophistication and the nuance to be able to talk about it, and we have to be very bulldogish about pushing that into our organizations wherever they may be. And it is hard. Again, I use the PICO network as an example because it is the place that I'm in. We're trying to push this conversation within our faith congregations and traditions. How many know, even black churches don't know how to talk about race? Somebody say amen, right? Don't know how to talk about anything that's about difference, right? So we have to be serious. I mentioned this a little bit yesterday when the conversation about the rappers came up. We have to be serious about living out what we say we're about, right? No matter if the money's there, no matter if it's popular, we have to be serious about being consistent, because I believe if we're consistent, then the movements become what we want them to be, not what they are, kind of handpicked to be by folks who happen to be in positions of power. And I think within at least our work in PICO, we're seeing a very amazing transformation internally. It's painful, but it is creating a very more powerful, relevant, and full expression of what it means to be human. And I think at the end of the day, I hope that's what it means to be progressive, is to be human.
Mic check. But you look good doing it. You know, history is best qualified to reward all those who research. And so we look at history and at the past movements that have come along, and we've seen some best practices. But what I failed to hear as movements evolve is how we should control the economic resources within our communities. There's $1 trillion among black people, but whether it's Reverend Sharpton's movement or Jesse Jackson movement, no one's talking about the people adopting a FUBU mentality, for us, by us mentality. Because if we can deprive these corporations of monies, then if we control our own money, we can finance our own liberation and change the conditions of our community. So my question is, what is your agenda in regards to developing economic empowerment among those in your respective circles so that we can have more control of the financing of our movement?
Pay tithes.
Does anybody want to take that?
I mean, I can try.
Yeah.
I'm something of a shot. You got a good apparatus, man. Yeah.
You go first.
You gonna go first?
Yeah.
I think you're absolutely right. I think that we were in Washington, D.C. a couple weeks ago, and I was riding down the street with a pastor from Baltimore. We were there to do some training, and we were riding, I think it's up one of them streets, J, K, I can't remember, one of the letter streets, and we drive by the Department of Commerce. And as we're talking, I said, you know what? I think I've been in every department building of the federal government except that building. And kind of what you're just saying really, you know, it was like, how come we're not playing in the conversation about the way money is being spent in this country at the highest level, right? We talk a lot about budgets being moral documents. I believe certainly we have a pipeline of money that comes through our, you know, kind of black-owned or communities of color-owned organizations that we certainly have access to, and we're trying to figure out how do we do a better job of you know, capturing that money, getting private donations, independent donations, et cetera, et cetera. But another source of revenue that we have access to that is even greater than the $200 million being committed by the My Brother's Keeper is the local municipality general funds of cities that have our tax dollars in them every single year, and they are up for grabs every year. There's no amount of money a foundation could give any of us that would outdo what the city of Oakland has available every year up for grabs related to this, and we have not yet figured out powerful ways to organize ourselves to make sure that those dollars in local and state and even federal general fund budgets are being employed for our purposes. So I think it is a very important conversation. We have to figure out how to do like fundraising better, development work better within our own kind of congregations and institutions that we own. And let us not forget that part of what it means to build a movement is not to get too far away from the largest sources of revenue which belong to us. Whenever I do a training, I say, remember, how many of y'all pay taxes? How many of y'all pay taxes in here? So it is not them who are financing the incarceration of our people. It is us, because those are our tax dollars, right? That changes the whole conversation, right? But we think once, you know, Uncle Sam take that money out, it's no longer ours. If we organize ourselves and really believe that that money belongs to us, then I believe we can actually unleash that money for a better good than the kind of purposes it is being used today. I'm not trying to skirt your question, but I just believe there are many sources of revenue that we have to get our minds wrapped around. Certainly the money that comes through our institutions, the money that is at our municipality levels, the money is at the federal levels. We have to do a much better job and build a better vision of how we activate that. And I believe one of those ways is voting, and I hope everybody's planning to vote in the midterm elections. In the city of Oakland or Alameda County, we had 16% turnout. which is an embarrassment. We all should be ashamed of ourselves and should not complain again until there's another time to vote. And I hope all of us are planning to do some work around that as well.
Rashad, did you want to?
I guess what I'll say quickly is, we spend a lot of time thinking about and trying to make the proposition to our members around how we use our resources. And when Color of Change was founded, we made a decision as an organization not to take corporate money. And we're the only national black civil rights organization that doesn't take corporate money. And as a result, we campaign against banks because we don't have their money. We campaign against fast food companies. We campaign against corporations on a regular basis. And I think your question is a good one in terms of how are we then directing people towards sort of what's next. I think it's an ongoing question of how do you sort of leverage the next step of political power. And I want to be really honest that I don't have a clear answer on sort of how we do that. But we have made very clear choices about how we think about sort of organizing in the 21st century and how we think about sort of who are the political targets and who are the folks that should have to hear from the community and have to be held accountable. And if our constituents in our community are sort of paying and using services, then those corporations politically and culturally need to be held accountable.
Great. We have time for 2 more questions. Sorry, Phil. So who's going to be? Got to get to the mic first.
All right, so I just wanted to ask if you had any comments, anybody has any comments on the paradox of ambition. And what I mean by that is you think about Dr. King and all of the movements that have happened since the civil rights era, yet his dream is still not realized. And so I heard you speaking earlier about creating spaces for those folks who've got these, what you said, the cloud people. I think I fit in that category. So I'm just wondering, what do you say about that? I mean, when you start to set goals about what you hope your movements will accomplish, I mean, is there such a thing as, well, we're not going to try that because that's not going to be successful? Or do you understand what I'm trying to say?
Well, I mean, I was just I don't know if I'm gonna answer your question, but what you were saying about the paradox of ambition, I feel like, yeah, I mean, I think we've always aimed for the impossible, because being undocumented at first, everybody was telling us, nobody's gonna listen to you, you can't vote, and so we're like, well, let's do this, like, whatever it's gonna take. Another thing they told us, you can never stop a deportation by yourself, but through community, grassroots, people power. And in Orange County, we have stopped so far 10. At first it was 5, and then the cases started piling up just by little things that we can know, legal things that we can know to help people fight their case and not have to be inside detention centers. And so I feel like every step of the way has been a challenge. Even when we decided to take on the Orange County Probation Department, I was in a meeting and 2 probation officers came up to me, and then they were like, they were really upset. They're like, what you're doing is going to cause a lot of problems. And he's like, I'm a realist, and I didn't get mad, I didn't get angry. I'm like, you know what, like, you might be a realist, but it's the visionaries that change things. And I'm not gonna be afraid. I'm not gonna be afraid of you. And so I feel like one of the things has been the challenges for our group nationwide has always been aim for the impossible and make it happen. Like a couple years ago, nobody thought we would get the California Dream Act. And now our aim is in stopping deportations nationwide. So our strategy is acting locally and impact nationally. So if we're able to create changes at the local level, hopefully we can lead to a transformation in the nation. So our strategy now is a lot more focused on strategizing locally to have larger impact.
Okay, we're tight on time, so I'm going to take one more question, and hopefully it's one that Phil has. Please.
My question's about your leadership. As a leader in my community, I'm inspired by what you guys have been talking about today, and I'd like to hear about your personal journey around your courage and consistency and the sacrifice that it takes to be a leader of a movement.
So I wish all of you could answer that, but I'm going to give it to Phil.
I'll be quick. I just my personal journey. I have a problem with. I'm really honest. So I grew up suffering from anxiety, from a genetic predisposition for depression, for being reluctant to accept my own power. I make mistakes. I second guess my second decisions. Man, I'm messing up. And I'm just human, and I think that makes that's the combination I'm owning. That's the combination that makes for quality leadership, because the image that we have created for leadership is very unattainable. It was that Dr. King was fearless. He never had a doubt. Malcolm X could never be beat at a debate. Rosa Parks. I think actually most of it was true about Rosa, but I think it's not real. It's totally unattainable, and it allows for us to none of us to really ever want to take leadership because we feel like we can't have that mantle. And it's a quote from one of my favorite shows, Game of Thrones. And the son asks his father. He says, "Dad, how can I be brave if I'm so filled with fear?" And he says, "Son, that is the only time you can be brave." And so just, I would say, and I need to accept my own words, but just accept that you're human and that you have a voice and that you do deserve to be. And that is what allows you to be, I believe, a great leader, because it allows other people to see themselves in you.
So those of you who have ever put together a panel know that you think about, you have your list of people that you want to be on the panel, and then you reach out to them, and most of them don't respond ever. I had the great privilege of having 4 people that I wanted on the panel, and all of them said yes. And I am so
It's because
grateful.
of the moderator.
I'm so grateful that you're here. It exceeded my expectations of what we would talk about, but what I'm hoping is that all of you are walking out of here with information that you need, not to start a new movement, but to join the one that's already begun. And I sort of want to make Phil sing to close this out.
Sing, Phil!
But if you're my friend on Facebook, Phil sang a song on Sunday in Pastor McBride's church that I think is a good capstone to this. So if you friend me, I'll say yes. I don't normally, but I will this week. And so
I'll tweet it out. So you got
you can tweet it out. We are so grateful that you decided to come here. There were at least 18 other sessions that you could have gone to, and I'm happy that you came here. I would really appreciate if you took the time to sign the evaluation and give us feedback. Only good things. We'll throw away all the rest. And please enjoy the rest of the conference, and thanks again for coming.